So we're here with Owen Russell. Owen, you're coming to us from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Owen, you've been a prominent member, tenor drummer with some prominent bands, the Windsor Police in Ontario, the 78th Regiment Highlanders, and for the last 10 years with Simon Fraser University. Lots of things are going on in the world right now in terms of equity and equal rights, and a lot of focus has been put on that. And we thought it'd be a good time to find out, your thoughts maybe about piping and drumming as a person of color, and maybe so that we can shed a bit of light on that from your perspective and your experience. Um, Maybe start off, have you ever experienced any kind of discrimination in piping and drumming?
Well, that's a hard question to answer, and it's not so. I mean, I think the easy answer is probably yes. I'm not sure that the. I think people may have differing opinions of what that looks, sounds, feels like, and I think that with everything going on today and everything that's been going on for years and years and years, especially in the States. I can't speak outside of the States because I'm from here. I think it's important that we look to that, and I think the opinion about what that looks like is starting to evolve and kind of grow into something different than what we maybe thought even 2 months ago or 2 years ago. Uh, I think that I probably experienced things like that, or I hear comments like, "Oh, there's the black guy," or "Oh, watch out, the black guy's going to do this," or something like that, or definitely comments like those for sure. That definitely happened, or going into a new person's house and maybe their dog doesn't have, maybe their dog isn't used to seeing someone that looks like me or something like that, or have been at places and they're like, you hear sirens in the background and someone's like, "Oh, Owen, what'd you do?" Things like that. And maybe they were intended as funny jokes. And maybe at a time I laughed along just to want to feel part of the group. And I don't think that if I didn't laugh along that I wouldn't have still been part of the group. I just think that maybe I did that and perhaps that wasn't the best thing, because if you don't say anything, people don't know as well. And so, to be fair, was I anytime that I heard something, did I always say something? No. So I mean, I would hope that with my bands, and especially with solos and things like that, I would hope that I have not, and I hope, and I'm under the impression that all of the placings or awards that I've received, and the students that I've gotten, I feel like they don't the race doesn't. I'm hoping that didn't have anything to do with anything, and I feel like that's probably accurate to a point. I think that there's always kind of the wow factor when there's something different, and me being something looking different coming up into you know some of these grade one bands and big bands, and you know, uh, I think that there's always kind of the wow factor, right? It's new, it's different, it's fresh. So I think that it probably turns some heads, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there was discrimination there, or even racism. I mean, I think I definitely hear comments. And hear things. I don't necessarily, it's not like I'm seeing people doing anything to, you know, openly discriminate against, people that aren't white. But I would say that there's definitely some of that in the culture. And I would argue that it would be naive to not think that there's some. And I mean, yeah,
Mm,
that's,
yeah. Um, what do you, I mean, considering that and the fact that there are so few people of color in piping and drumming, at least in North America and the UK, just observing. What do you think could be done to improve that sort of situation? Is it a welcoming environment for persons of color to come into piping and drumming?
Okay. So two-parted question, which means two answers. I think so. I'll share my kind of experience with it and when I came into it. I have been around. I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota, near the McAllister College, uh, near McAllister College, just several blocks away. My mom was a student there, and the McAllister Scottish Fair started sometime in the 70s, I believe, and she was a student when it started there, and she never really left the area. And my parents were huge, anything Celtic, Scottish, Irish, anything. I was getting dragged to Irish fests from a very young age. I was dragged to the McAllister games, um, always seeing pipe bands and things like that. And it always kind of struck my eye. I always loved the tenor. I didn't really notice that there weren't a lot of people that looked like me. I was just so young, and kids don't think that way necessarily. So I was attracted to it, and I will say, yeah, like I can still remember to this day going up to the first band that I played with, which is the Minnesota Pipes and Drums. My parents and I walked up to Steve Sutherland, who was the lead drummer there, and they just said, "Hey, we heard that you guys give free lessons. Can our son come and take lessons?" And they said, "Yeah, sure, absolutely. Like, great, more than welcome. They're free. We start on Tuesdays. Like, here's when he can start." And then they introduced me to who my instructor would be, which is Joe Hickey. And Joe just taught me like he was anybody else. He just took the job and he was like, "Hey, I'm going to teach this 7-year-old kid. This 7-year-old kid, like many other 7-year-old kids, is going to drive me crazy." But he did it, and from there, I was always welcomed in. They welcomed our family in. They put up with my dad, who was a little bit of a helicopter parent at times, especially in my younger days, but fair enough. Uh, so it always felt welcoming, always did. I think where it maybe started to feel different or odd was when I got into my teenage years, mid to late teenage years, when you actually start to associate and identify these types of things. You're like, oh, this is a very, primarily white activity. It's a upper, waspy activity, kind of a, it's not a cheap hobby. Let's just say, it's definitely more than paying $1,200 to play basketball for a year or hockey for a year or something like that. But even as I began to grow and develop as a player, I noticed that people started to like recognize that, and then also, as I started to get recruited, people just treated me like a person and came up to me and simply gave me offers. I used to seek out, certain bands and certain things. Like from a very young age, since I was 9, I always wanted to play in SFU. Always. That was basically it. I didn't want to do anything but play in SFU. That was the biggest thing. And so that's what I spent, a lot of my young life doing, and maybe most of my high school doing, was trying to get to a level where I could be considered for that. And I never felt really unwelcomed. I always felt welcomed in, especially in bands that I joined as I began to grow up. Like, I think people just said, "Hey, like, who cares what this guy looks like? Like, he can play, and we want to have him be a part of our team." So I never felt unwelcomed. But I mean, certainly there was comments and things, but I never really felt unwelcomed or unwanted. The second question that you asked, part of this, I think, was, what can we do to make it feel more welcoming, and what steps are, So I think there's a couple of things that you can do. The first thing, I think, is to start by trying to attract, other people. Especially in the States, we have a unique situation. A lot of bands are based out of right outside of large metropolis cities. I'll name, when I think of that, I think of the New Yorks, the Chicagos, the Minneapolises, the Clevelands, the LAs, San Franciscos, these big cities, which are already very rich in diversity. And so I wonder, hey, is this an opportunity for us to branch out to some of these communities and see if there might be interest in not only the younger generation and the youth, but perhaps there are adult learners that would be interested in learning as well. But I don't even know if people outside of pipe bands necessarily even know what pipe band is. And I would, again, wager that most people think, when they think bagpipes and things like that, they think of whatever the last movie that had bagpipes in it was, and I mean, if that, one that comes to mind is one of the Batman movies. I think it was Dark Knight, and it's like they've got a street parade band marching up and down the street. Nothing wrong with street and parade bands. That's kind of what I started in, but that's not really the true nature of what it is. That's not what I'm doing. It's a competitive, a very competitive art form, and I think we could do more to try and recruit from areas that have more diversity and be more welcoming, because you never know unless you try. And so who knows, what if there was a afternoon recital or something like that, and they saw people playing and there was interest sparked by that. Kids see things and they'd see what they like, so that might spark some interest. I mean, who wouldn't be interested if somebody like, oh, I don't know, Reed Maxwell or Stephen McWhirter or something like that, if one of those guys just popped up and started playing, like, who wouldn't be interested in that? You know what I mean? Who wouldn't? Of course. So, I mean, I think there's definitely work to do to try and encourage others that are not, other minority groups. There's definitely work to do to get that interest, but I think we have to try. I think you got to start there, to just let people know that I don't think that there's even enough notice about what it is in general. So if it's only it's a certain small group already, but then there's not many people that know about it outside of it. If we can branch it out and just put more awareness about what pipe bands really are and some of the positive things that can come from it, I think we might start to see more interest from other groups of people, as opposed to the kind of norm group that we see here currently.
Considering all that, what you've talked about, how long do you think it would take before pipe bands and piping and drumming in general, at least in North America, might change its, the way they look, uh, to be a more of a diverse place for all types of people. No, that's terrible. Stop. Let me do it again.
Okay.
Like struggling for words. Okay, right. So considering all that, Owen, what you just said, how long do you think it'll take before the kind of typical white male piping and drumming scene changes to be one of more diversity, at least in North America?
I think I don't think it's something that would be overnight. I think, given the amount of time it takes to, of course, I play the instrument, the tenor, that is the fastest, comes up the fastest, but I think it takes a while to reach the caliber of what's going on now, a while. But I mean, it takes piping and drumming a long time to get ready. So I don't think it's just something that'll happen overnight. I think it's maybe a 5-year plus process. And I think that the UK has done a phenomenal job with teaching, and they have it built in their curriculum where somebody is learning from the best every day. I mean, imagine, if we had schools, we do have a couple here. I look at St. Thomas as kind of the front runner, especially in the States. I can't speak to Canada, but especially in the States, for school programs where piping and drumming is part of your curriculum. That I think that would help expedite things, certainly. But if you're looking at people that are literally just learning for free and are kind of showing up once a week on Tuesday evening, and maybe they can't afford $40 or $50 or $60 an hour for lessons, then that might be a low ball figure. I'm not sure what the going rate is. Maybe they can't afford lessons, so the teaching is such an important part of it. So I think it kind of depends on who is teaching, of course, who the students are, and then like what they what they can do in terms of money, because this is not a cheap hobby by any means. And um, if somebody's just learning for free, they might not be as motivated to continue to practice. The parents may not push as hard as they might as if their kid was just taking trumpet lessons or something. So I think it's not going to be a quick thing, but I think it can start to become a more, as we discussed earlier, a more, or to appear more welcoming. I think that can happen sooner, but I think before you see, a much more diverse range, I think it's going to look, I think it's going to be, a while. Hopefully I'm still playing when that happens.
So just to wrap up, any further thoughts about persons of color, being in competing pipe bands, and anything that comes to mind right now in this place and time, and what's going on around the world with awareness?
Uh, well, I think while there has been so many negative things going on, and I'm in the center of it here in Minneapolis, um, but not just the center. It's happening everywhere. I think that we can use these negative experiences and opportunities. Maybe we can, my hope would be that we could turn this into a positive experience and use it as a positive experience for everybody to learn, grow, develop, and become more appreciative, accepting, and aware of diversity, and just being mindful of what you're saying and how we carry ourselves and the messages that we communicate, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, how how that may feel to others, being aware. And this is something I learned in my college, from my communication degree, just being aware that you don't always determine how somebody is going to receive your message. As the communicator, you don't get to determine how I interpret that. Unfortunately, I do. So keeping that in mind, I think is really important. I think will help uh, people to become more sensitive and just to be more mindful about things that they may say or actions that they may do. Especially when we've got young kids in bands. It's some of the things and the talk and behaviors that were just kind of accepted for so long. I think we could use this as a positive chance to kind of right the ship and make it a more positive experience for all parties involved, and not just people of color or anything like that. Like there's things for everybody. So
Yeah. Well, Owen Russell, really appreciate your insight and your comments, observations over your years of accomplishment, with some of the best bands in the world, and really appreciate the time you've taken to share your thoughts with us today.
yeah, thanks, Andrew. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to seeing some positive steps forward.